Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 459, and we're going to talk about AIOps. And if you don't know that term, we'll get into it because it's actually something that I don't think a lot of people they use the term, they don't really know what it means. We're recording this episode on May 4th, so if you're a Star Wars fan, this is your day. We've tried not to do too many Star Wars jokes. And our special guest is Allison Jones, and we'll get to Allison in a little bit. But for now, Sujit, what do you have for news?
Hey, Evan. I've got three items today to discuss. One of them is regarding Databricks. As you know, in Databricks, if you're doing some queries, you could connect to a SQL server. And typically that would have to be something that you set up beforehand. It would be like a dedicated SQL server. Well, now you could use the serverless SQL when you connect to Azure Databricks. And so that allows you to do kind of, impromptu queries.
So this is into Databricks, not
into Databricks
as a destination for Databricks. Okay.
Correct. And this way, you're only, when you make those queries to pull in the data, you're only paying for the query that you make, right? Not for keeping the SQL around all the time. So it's kind of connected to Databricks in that sense, that dynamic serverless SQL. Second one is a new SKU for the Azure Event Hubs. It's the dedicated self-serve scalable cluster. It's kind of a long term, actually, but essentially what it is it used to be that you'd spin up Event Hubs using whatever SKUs are available, which are the shared SKUs typically.
The multi-tenant.
The multi-tenant SKUs, yeah, and you could kind of spin up you can increase the number of compute units, as they call it, over there. But each unit itself was limited to about 50 megabits per second or messages per second. Now with the new dedicated self-serve clusters, you can have much. First of all, you get full control, right? It's just for yourself. It's not like you're sharing in a multi-tenanted approach, and so the streaming rate that you can process is very predictable, right? So if you have a real-time scenario and you want to make sure you always get that consistent stream capability, this is the SKU for you, right? So it's the Azure Event Hubs dedicated self-serve. Each of the compute units, I think, goes up to almost like 200 megabits per second now. And then, of course, you can increase that. You can have 10 of them. So you can really get very, very high scale at a very well-defined level. And the third one is a new VM type. These are the EBSV5 and EBDSV5. These are the new VMs that have the NVMe interface enabled. And as you know, with the NVMe interface, the IOPS that you can get is like some crazy number.
Super high, yeah.
260,000 IOPS is the max it can go to, which is pretty astounding. So definitely, if you have those kind of needs, these are now available in a number of regions out there.
That number makes me laugh a little bit, because I remember sort of earlier in the days, it was 500 IOPS per disk, and if you wanted to go higher, you had to do all these funky things with multiple disks, and now that the numbers are just super high as the technology is advanced.
Yep.
Yeah. So the two that I wanted to raise today is so generally available, the Azure Monitor alerts. This is a feature that's been around for a while, but what we've added is when you point it to a resource, there's going to be sort of basically a library of alerts that it's going to recommend from. Again, sort of common things so that you get some sense of what you should be checking on, and it will also recommend potential levels as well for that. And then for Azure Advisor, again, Azure's, yes, you pay per minute, you pay per compute unit, right, in Azure, but we're all about our customers using their money wisely. And so we released Azure Advisor right-sizing recommendations so that you're not overspending relative to your resource consumption. But it was always at a fixed look-back time. And so if your workload is maybe it's sort of variable on a monthly cycle, or maybe it's variable on a weekly cycle, the fixed look-back period doesn't necessarily work to get the right cycle time for you. So now you can adjust it to sort of match what your cycle is so that you get the right recommendation for that. So again, it's just helping our customers spend their money more wisely. Cool, great. Well, so with that news sort of out of the way, let's, Allison, if you could introduce yourself, tell us what you do here at Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Allison Jones, and I'm the group program manager for Azure's AIOps system team. Essentially, what we're doing is looking at AI, ML models, and unifying that with big data to figure out how we can make our operations more efficient. Both looking at things like pre-release deployment, change management. How can we make what we're introducing into production more high quality and healthy, as well as how do we respond to live site incidents more effectively, so we really can automate all of that instead of having manual touches. So that's just a brief overview of what we're focused on here.
Yeah, and I, besides the fact that I know you're working to put me out of a job since I spend my time on those incidents, but that would be a good thing actually. I could go do other stuff, right? I think I do want to level set because we've had other guests on the past, various services and products, and the focus is typically on services and products that our customers can use coming from Azure. Your area is a little bit different because your focus is on sort of how do we optimize the operations underneath the management of the system underneath so that it ends up in a better experience for our customers. But at the end of the day, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anything you're working on directly is sort of maps one-to-one with a public facing service.
I'll correct you a little bit there.
Okay.
There's actually a lot of opportunity to bring the things that we're doing to 3P customers.
Okay.
And we've engaged with a lot of our customers who are interested in a variety of things. One, for example, is being able to consume Azure's health signals into their own system so that they can actually have a better view of how the Azure offerings and subscriptions that they're using are actually doing and if they're unhealthy. So definitely exposing that data to customers is one area. We may not monetize it, but it would be something that a customer could ingest and then use it in their own day-to-day monitoring systems. The other thing that we've really seen, and there's a big sort of 3P standalone AIOps industry that's sort of new, in the last maybe 5 years, is being able to productize the platform so that a customer could actually use the models that we're using internally for running their own data centers, running their own applications. And so making some of this available through Azure Monitor would be definitely.
Like some of the anomaly stuff, does that sort of map up to what your team's working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I was actually, okay. My mistake.
Yeah, and one area here that we've seen a lot of opportunity is really with AKS and being able to do troubleshooting, anomaly detection and troubleshooting for containers, native containers applications, because that's an area where it's difficult to traverse, where the actual anomaly is occurring. And so that's a focus that we have right now that we would expose in Azure Monitor, in the next couple semesters. Possibly, but that's an area where you could see some of these solutions actually bleeding into 3P products.
Okay, and 3P, just for the audience, 3P is what we call internally sort of third-party customers. So this is customers that are purchasing Azure on top as compared to what we call 1P or first party, which is services like Xbox, M365, all the various internal Microsoft services.
Right. Thank you.
No worries. So let me start with maybe a different question, because you actually, we mentioned AIOps at the beginning. AIOps is sort of this big term, and you mentioned some sort of, individual examples of where you're seeing that capability show up. But how do you actually define AIOps? Like, I mean, that's not in and of itself, it's not a thing I can put my hands on. It's more of something like a description for some set of capabilities. Is that the right way to think about it?
It is, and again, the term AIOps was actually something that Gartner coined.
Okay.
Like I said, probably about 5-6 years ago, because we had this all this big data, observability, monitoring, telemetry, is growing exponentially, especially as you talk about managing a public cloud. I mean, there's petabytes and petabytes, billions of time series data generated, especially with a large cloud like Azure. And so managing and making sense of all the data, understanding, when anomaly happens, the needle in the haystack problem.
Mm-hmm.
Has become a growing concern. And so, we saw this explosion of looking at machine learning to minimize or at least pinpoint, through this huge stack of big data, like where, you should actually be focused on instead of, all these alerts that you may be getting. And so, Gartner actually coined this term, and it's really that monitoring, it's service desk and then automation union that we're seeing, like a number of solutions out there being productized and sold, because many companies are now having this problem. It's pretty cheap to store data and to generate alerts. But what you need to do with it,
what do you do with them?
it's more than a human could figure out. And so this is where AI ML has been really helpful for companies, running their businesses.
Okay, makes sense.
Hey, Allison, I wonder, we have existing Azure services, right? Like Sentinel and Defender for Cloud, and that, I guess they do some things similar to what you just described. Maybe not for, they're more security focused, I suppose, as opposed to you're looking at more from an operational perspective. I'm just wondering, though, is there any kind of overlap in between, what you're trying to achieve and what these existing services do today?
It's a good question. I would assume that there's probably some AI ML capabilities baked into those applications. I'm not familiar with it. I think the biggest difference that I would probably say is that, the AIOps solutions that we're looking at may take multiple signals. They could take, security type signals. They could take, many different, they could be hardware. It doesn't have to be, it could be customer, outside in type of signals. And being able to aggregate across multiple signals and come up with different insights and conclusions, where Sentinel may be focused on a particular type of signal related to security, and then trying to figure out within that signal. But broader AIOps solutions, really the benefit there is aggregating across many different types of signals. I think that's probably the biggest difference.
So one of the challenges, with data is all this data is it's coming from a lot of different sources. It could be coming from, theoretically, you could be, having some of your components running in AWS. You have some in Azure, you've got guest level stuff, you've got platform stuff like you were talking about that we're emitting into, Azure Monitor. Like, how do I get all my data in the same place to start with it? Or can, can I use tools like, the Azure monitoring, anomaly detection, whatnot, to sort of look across sort of distributed data? Like, how do I manage that as a customer?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest challenges that we see with customers trying to, incorporate some AIOps standalone solution into their infrastructure. Because, and even, it's a big challenge for us as well with all this different types of service monitors, for example, without having some standard set of things that have been defined consistently, it's very difficult to stitch together a story or stitch together, a view of what's actually happening without some sort of standardization. So, one of the, as one of the big things that we've been focused on is we've got lots of monitoring, lots of different types of data that we collect. But everybody's defined different dimensions in a different way, slightly different way. And so, the thing that we really like to tell customers when they're saying, we want to stand up AIOps solution, how are you guys doing it, is you do need to have some sort of standardization in the signal if you want to be able to join multiple signals across them and make some sort of really specific or high precision anomaly detection. And depending on where you are, you may not need a really high type of precision. You could have lower, like in a development environment, but you'd really want to have a very high precision, for live site response, right? Where you want to make sure you're super accurate in, the detection that's happened. And so that's what I would say. Ingesting multiple signals, but you do need to have something that you can join in a standardized signal, and most people have not had that journey yet. So it's something that really needs to be there for the system to function effectively.
And is that where like open telemetry comes in? Those standards, sort of coming down that, from out of that effort? Is that what you're talking about, or is it something different than that?
Yeah, open telemetry is great for API calls, and that's definitely one standard that would be good for those type of signals. I think for us, we're looking at SLI SLO as that standard signal, because it can really cut across wherever the service is in the stack, whether it's core infrastructure or whether it's a higher level, sort of business application that's exposed to a customer. Having an SLI is the mechanism that we're relying on and that we're driving teams to incorporate, because it can transcend the stack. Whereas I think open telemetry and distributed tracing is more focused on API to API. Which is good, but that would be an additional signal that can then, help understand the complete cloud health by using that and ingesting that into the AIOps system.
Okay. And again, for the audience, service level SLI is service level indicator, which is a measurement of some, some other piece of activity, and then SLO would be service level objective, which is your target for that. So really, if I sort of translate what I think I heard you describing, is you have some target you're shooting for, and you're tracking whether or not you're at, above, or below that target, and that's sort of your aggregate one, because that should be common across any service or scenario or whatever the case may be. Okay.
Right, and it's an industry standard sort of signal. It's not something that Microsoft came up with, so any customer can go ahead and implement this and kind of drive to standardization with this signal today.
So Allison, I'm curious, how do you go about, how should customers go about figuring out what kind of model they want to use here, right? When you talk about doing AIOps, you're looking at all this data. What kind of model should they be using? How do they train that model so that it's effective in detecting these things, right? Especially you talk about the life side. That's probably the most extreme case. So are there existing tools that we have in Azure that they can use, or is this something that they would have to, build from scratch using maybe something like Databricks, something we talked about that in the preamble to the show, or just trying to figure out what kind of tools customers can use to start creating their own sort of AIOps model.
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably wouldn't recommend that a customer go off and try and build their own AI/ML models. There's we have the benefit of having a dedicated research team who is looking at building and training models and partnering with larger dedicated teams like OpenAI to come up with breakthroughs in models that can then be reused. So for us, we actually reuse models that have been created by the research team, but then use our own business purposes, and signals. But the model in and of itself isn't something that I would say a customer probably wants to focus time on. They would rather have Microsoft or some AIOps solution build the model and then allow them to plug in their data to that model and maintain the model themselves. So it would just sort of depend on the dedicated resources, but there's some there would be a really big uplift for a company to want to build their own models. I will say, the benefit of that is, if you think about ChatGPT and kind of the unstructured data model that was developed there, I mean, that's something that came out of OpenAI and has really transformed how, you can aggregate unstructured data. We still haven't seen that on the structured data, which is more the AIOps world that we live in, where we have structured data sets. But that's coming, and I think there's going to be, one or two research labs that can figure that out in the world. It's not going to be, from a customer whose main business isn't actually invested in AI/ML models. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
yeah, no, I think it did. I just want to ask like a follow up on that, and I'm just trying to understand how customers can get started in this, right? So I know, like for example, if you spin up, an ML workspace in Azure, right, using Azure ML. One of the models out there is a regression model, right, you could use, and so that comes to mind as something that you talked about, doing regression detection. You kind of feed it a lot of data, past historical data, and then as you're looking at the current data, it'll figure out if you're going below or above those thresholds that you talked about. So I'm just, I guess that was my question, is, are there existing tools to help us, so our customers can get started on it today? I mean, obviously not all customers have the luxury of a dedicated research team like we have, as you said, but they all have the needs that you described about they have their own Azure workloads today, and they want to detect if things are doing well with those workloads. So if this is something that we're planning to eventually bake into the system as a product, or provide some sort of guidance on how customers can do this themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of goes back to the original question on, are we just internal facing, or are we also going to expose something to customers? And there's definitely an opportunity with what we're building for Azure to make that available to larger customers. And there's an ask there. There are some standalone AIOps products that are out there today that customers can also purchase and implement and put them in their own infrastructure if they wanted to. But definitely that's something that we are looking at as well. How can we, expose and productize, the models that we're using internally that we have sort of proven success running cloud scale operations? How can we make those available to customers? That's definitely something that, is a possibility and opportunity for us.
So we've been talking a lot about sort of getting the data in place and good and bad strategies for that, as well as, alerting off of it and triggering, either notifying a human or whatnot. But once you alert, you have to do something with it. What's the typical mechanism that you recommend people look at for sort of responding to when an alert goes out, where you don't, like, let's say what you want to do, like maybe I want to restart that machine or whatever. Do we recommend people, go use Azure Automation? Or is there capabilities built into Monitor to, go trigger some action? Like, what do I do? Okay, great. So I threw an alert. I still have to do something with it. What's that side of the experience look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think today internally we have our own custom incident management system.
Yep.
And we've standardized across Microsoft. For the most part, every business unit in Microsoft uses ICM for managing alerts, incidents, outages. That's definitely something that we would recommend a customer invest in. We don't have a system today that Microsoft offers as a product that does this, but there are some big names. ServiceNow is one of them that a lot of our enterprise customers use. And so standardizing on some sort of incident management system is a critical step to this. If we did not have that internally to Microsoft, we wouldn't be successful in the AIOps effort. That would be too fragmented of an experience. And there's a number of benefits to having that standardization. So that would be the biggest recommendation, I would say.
Okay.
Just on that, I would just had an alert to look at one of my services that's hosted in Azure. It's a public-facing service that is hosted on the Microsoft subscription. So I get these alerts to kind of take action on them. And I noticed that the Azure Defender for Cloud service does have some of these capabilities where, they kind of itemize all of the findings, and then you have to, you have to assign people to them and kind of go and check off that you've addressed the alert. So there's some sort of rudimentary facility seems to be available in Azure Defender for cloud, is what I noticed today. So I mean, yeah, of course, products like ServiceNow and all are top notch in these spaces, and they do very well. But I think if customers just want to get something quick going, that might be one place to look at.
Yeah, I think Azure Service Health and the built-in alerting there is a good first step. What we've heard from customers, though, is that they really want to have a holistic system that marries, what their alerting systems internally, and then add what Azure is pushing. So for the most part, I don't think our customers are looking heavily at like what we surface up in Azure Portal and even at the alerts themselves. They want to ingest that into a system that they have, which is probably ServiceNow, so that they can look at it in relation to anything else that might be happening in their applications that are on-prem applications, right? Like a lot of customers are still very hybrid. And so the cloud tells one story, on-prem tells another. They want to see the whole picture, which wouldn't be available in Azure Service Health or Azure Portal today.
Yeah, we've actually had some Arc folks, Azure Arc folks on that. What they would, they look at a little bit more broad, but you're still only sort of getting data from those systems across it. You don't necessarily have the control plane side of it that we do on the Azure piece for sure. No, this is great, Allison.
Go
ahead.
I do have one question. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to understand from if Allison can share from a scale of compute that is required to run these AI ops, right? And of course, we don't want to reveal anything that we shouldn't be revealing on this show. But can you give us an idea as to how much? What's the scale of the compute required to kind of run these AI ops systems? Is it like hundreds of CPUs, VMs? I'm just curious, how intense is this whole system? Where we can be ingesting data, we're kind of processing it at real time, trying to come up with some sort of analysis.
Sujit, right here, it's right over here.
It's a little box on your desk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. The AIOps system itself is fairly small. It's pretty inexpensive service for us to run. I would say that the cost of running the observability pipelines and the size and scale of actually collecting the telemetry, I mean, they do a lot of processing on the data before it even gets to the AIOps system. That is huge, right? And so I would say the bigger cost is on the observability telemetry side rather than the AIOps system itself. But I don't have exact numbers.
But you kind of get the massage data by the time you get it. It's already been kind of filtered and formatted and whatnot. So it's in a clean state where you can just quickly run your models on it at that time.
Yes, I mean more or less, but yes, there's been a lot of processing done on the data before it gets to us. Yeah, health evaluation. There's a health system. There's the monitors are hundreds of millions of monitors are evaluated every minute on the pipeline side.
That's what I was wondering. Just now, the number of signals coming in. Like we talked about Event Hub just coincidentally just now, and how we need it kind of ingest all these events coming in. And I can imagine, at least when I've done this with other customers, they're like 20-30,000 messages per second or something, or signals per second is what they are monitoring. And this could be log data. This could be, of course, activity logs and things like that. What's the? I'm just trying to figure out the scope of what you have to deal with. Is it how many signals per second are we talking about there? Is it 1,000, 10,000?
Well, I mean, again, on the telemetry, the collection side, it's billions of time series per minute. Okay. So the collection is very large. I think when we're not going to put that into an AIOps system. I think by the time the data has been processed, stored and processed. We're looking at thousands of anomalies per day, maybe hundreds of gigabytes per day in the AI. So, and you wouldn't want to have anything more than that. It would just be noise. And then from that, which ones are actually actionable? There's probably, millions of auto operations that happen per day, whether it's create an incident or, some other action, a communication, some sort of a routing that might occur. But the collection is the biggest part, especially for Azure's scale. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sujit, part of when I think about your question is that, we end up pushing a lot of this off to the individual services, right? The SLI, SLO piece we were talking about before, right? The service has all its own telemetry and own signals, and then it's going to emit, it's probably an oversimplification, but sort of one metric to the AIOps layer to say, hey, yes, we're above we're above the target, or we're below the target, and here's the target. But it took a lot of work just to even get to that one, and then multiply that times all the services. I don't even want to think about. I have heard some numbers. I'm not going to quote them here, but the numbers I've seen quoted for the size of the Kusto clusters some of these teams have to run, that alone is bigger than some customers' bills. Those numbers are gargantuan.
Yes,
for sure.
They are.
For sure.
And we'll still use, all the data can still be used. It's just having that, standardized signal has been, the biggest sort of tipping point for our success in being able to land the AIOps solution here.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you.
No, this is great, Allison. I appreciate you, sort of adding some clarity to that, right? Like we talked about before, it's a really murky term, but there are some actionable things people can do today, right, to leverage it. Any last thoughts or comments that you want to leave the audience with?
Just that we do publish quite consistently blogs and articles on some of the models that we're training and building here and how we're using them internally. It's a little bit piecemeal, but if you're really interested in sort of the tech, there are a number of resources that I can provide, as well as.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, as well as Mark Rusinovich's blog. He, I think once every couple of months likes to post on some of the AIOps things that we're doing internally. It's really a collaboration across multiple teams inside Microsoft, because there's a large AIOps team also looking at M365. Obviously, Bing, has a fairly large team. So, if anyone's interested in that space, Microsoft does. Participates in community events and does blogs, and there's several of us that are like to geek out on the tech part of it as well. So I'll share those with you.
Yeah, no, great. Appreciate it. Again, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, folks.